Today I'm going to be testing out some new brush pens. So hello, welcome to my channel if you're new around here. My name is Katie, I'm a full-time sketchbook artist, and today I'm going to be testing out the Kuretake Zig Real Brush Pens. They have quite a long name. They are by Kuretake, which is a Japanese brand. I did buy a couple of these when I was out in Japan last year, but I've been very kindly given these by my friend Ohn Mar, so I have a heap of them to try now, so I'm really excited to give these a test today. This isn't going to be a thorough review video, but I do want to compare it to my usual brush pens, which are the Tombows, and just give these a swatch. I've not got the full colour range here, of course, because these are the ones that Ohn Mar gifted me that she didn't use. So I'm going to be swatching them over here on the left side of my spread, and then I'll also be doing a drawing with them so you can see how I'll use them in my work. So these came up a couple of times because I did talk about wanting some more sort of muted brush pens when I was on my creative hangout call with my patrons the other week. And I had a couple of messages afterwards, one from Teresa saying that she recommended these, and also from Ohn Mar, who uses some of these when she is out and about on her walks, doing her drawing as she goes along. And she said that she didn't use the rest of them, so she very kindly brought them along to the workshop that I hosted last week and said I could have them. So thank you so much, Ohn Mar. I'll leave a link to her down below. But yeah, I'm really excited to give these a proper try. As I said, I'm going to be swatching them. There are some really bright colours in here and also some more muted ones, so we're going to give them a test today. Now a little bit about these brush pens. So these have the widest colour range that I've found of 180 colours, which I guess is why there's more muted colours in this range. They are a brush type watercolour pen, that's how it's described on the Kuretake website, and you can see that the nib is quite small and it goes from very thin to quite thick at the nib. They have very soft bristles, which we'll see when I do a close-up of the swatching, but they are tapered, and they have individual bristles which are quite different from the Tombows that I usually use. Let me just grab a Tombow so we can compare. So they are smaller, they are a lot shorter, which is helpful because sometimes I do find that the Tombows don't fit in a lot of pencil cases. So they're smaller there, and the only thing is you don't have a coloured lid, so it's a little bit harder to see what they are, but they do have the coloured end. So when I do store my brush pens, I think I'll store them this way down. I do that with my Tombows anyway because I think it's better for the ink flow. So let's compare the nibs. Now with Tombows you obviously get the super thin end, which I don't tend to use, whereas the Kuretake you've just got the felt tip end. Okay, so you can see the nib is much wider on the Tombows here on the left versus the right, so it's a lot smaller and a little bit more refined. Because of the individual brushes, you can get quite a lot of texture from this one compared to the Tombow. So let's just swatch that in the back, which is where I tend to do my materials tests. Okay, so here is the Tombow. So I can still get quite fine lines and very thick ones. This is the ZIG Clean colour, so again, it's very juicy. Actually, it's a lot juicier than the Tombows, and again with the fine lines. I think I can definitely go a lot thinner with these. These tend to be used for calligraphy as well in Japan. That's what I've read on the website, and for crafting. So you can get a bit of a wider range of thicknesses with these. And you can see here, when I splay it out, you can see the individual bristles there. So you can get some of these textures, more like grass textures, a bit more of the bristles, which I think will be fun to play around with. So that's the difference between the Tombow and the Zig. So let's do a big swatching session, see what colours that I've been given, and then we will take a look at how I use brush pens as my first layer before I add on my mixed media on top. Okay, so on to the swatching. So there are 40 colours that Ohn Mar kindly gifted me, so I'm going to be swatching them just in my Venezia sketchbook, which is my current sketchbook that I'm using at the moment. So I'm actually starting off with some super bright ones. These are almost like highlighters actually, so very, very bright. I couldn't even capture it very well on the camera, but you can definitely see, especially with that yellow one. There are some softer ones, so the more pastel colours, which are a bit more muted, and definitely softer. I think because there are 180 colours in this collection, then it makes sense why there are some more muted ones, because like I said earlier, there is a wider range than I've seen in other brush pens that I've used. So the brush pens were pretty juicy. Some of them were less juicy than others. I think that just depends on how dried out the nib was, but there was definitely time for me to smudge, and you'll see later on I'm going to test the blending as well, which worked really nicely. You can see that some of the colours are very vibrant. This red was very, very strong, and also some of the pinks, but then there are also some more pastel colours like the softer pinks and the peaches and the yellows, so definitely some options there. And I think if I wanted some other ones to add to this collection, I can just pick and choose. I haven't had a look to see if I can buy them individually in the UK, but that would be really helpful if I could, or I'll just wait till I'm in Japan because Kuretake is a Japanese company, so that's an option too. I do really love some of these softer blues and greens. Some of the greens were very vibrant, which you'll see I will tackle later in how to pare them back and make them a little bit more earthy. So I'm just adding all my swatches to this page. There's some really nice greys as well. I do tend to find greys are tricky to find in brush pens, so there's a huge selection of the greys here and also a black. So now that I've done all the basic swatching, I wanted to see how it worked with water, and this is where they really shone. I loved how sort of watercolory they became, and so I also tested them blending on top, and because it didn't sink into the paper immediately, you can see there, it's created this sort of turquoise. Just adding the colours at the end so you can see the difference there, but they really blended nicely. And for this one I did a little bit of both, so I blended the blue and the red and then added water on top just to create that sort of purple. So I think this is where they shine the most. I really liked how juicy they are and how easily they blend, so definitely something that I was impressed with, and I'll be using that in my piece of art which I'm about to show you too. But here's a little overview of the swatches and how they turned out. And you can see that there are definitely some brighter ones here, but I do think that because they are easy to blend and add water to, I can layer them up together, which we're going to experiment with now. Okay, so again, I'm just staying in my Venezia sketchbook and I'm just starting to lay down some colour. You can see that I kind of swap between them. I wanted loads of different colours to try them all out in this piece, and there is some time for me to smudge as well. I do always recommend swatching new art supplies because it gives a real feel for what the colours will actually look like on your paper and not just on the caps or the end of the pen in this case. You can definitely see that they have much more flexible bristle tips, which is what I showed earlier, so they do act more like water brushes, but as you can see here I'm adding on water on top, and then I can come back in with my brush pen as well, so they are really versatile. I do like that you can get really broad strokes depending on the pressure. That green especially worked really well there. And here's an example where I am layering up the very bright green with an orange. So because they are complementary colours, it paired it back really nicely, so it created a more of an earthy olivey green, which is what I prefer compared to the brighter grass green that it is on its own. I also did come in with my finger as well, so I just dipped my finger in my water pot and that spread the colour really nicely, so there's definitely a lot of pigment in these pens and I think that's why they work so nicely when they are layered. I use the orange and green combo a lot, but you can do that with any colours if you use the complementary colour, so whatever is opposite in the colour wheel. Definitely something that I'm going to be using with these pens. When I use my Tombows or my Ecolinas, I do tend to use them just as they are, whereas I think with these ones it kind of encourages me to combine them more. Especially here, I used the pink there and then coming in with the water, and the paper took this really well, so I was pleased with that, and it creates a really painterly effect which I don't tend to use my other brush pens for. So I do think that these can hold their own. I really like that I now have this option and I do feel like this is their strength. It definitely felt more like I was using paintbrushes instead of a felt tip pen because of those bristles, so it does mean that I could have a little bit more freedom with the texture, and it does take a little bit of practice I think, but it is quite forgiving, so I was really playing around with the textures here and coming in with my paintbrush and with the water to really play around with those texture effects. I'm just adding on a mountain in the distance, so this was actually referenced from a picture I took in Norway. I'm hoping to do a Norway sketchbook flip soon. There's not that many pages, but I did recently go to Norway and do some art whilst I was there. Now in the picture there was some really strong contrasted trees in the front. Now I didn't want to go too dark, so I did start off with this pink, and you'll see I layer up a grey on top of it, which worked really nicely. There was also a signpost in this picture which I decided not to add on in the end, and I'm glad I didn't because I think it would have distracted from all of this lovely colour. So you can see here I'm utilising the thin lines of this brush pen. I do really like how thin I can get it, and the pigment payoff is really good, so I found these really easy to use. You can see I'm layering on top of other colours there, and then I'm coming in with using that texture to create some of the leaves. Now, I do struggle a little bit with leaves. I did also come in with the multi-layers effect with the different colours, but I do sometimes struggle with making it look quite natural. So you'll see I kind of got a little bit impatient with adding on individual leaves, so I did end up just smudging this on. That sort of yellowy olive green was the driest one of the bunch, but it did work really nicely for texture, and then I did come in with my finger just to smudge it out, and that worked nicely. You will see later on though that I smudged out a blue area with this dirty green finger, and you'll see me sort of try and salvage that. So I've got my sort of painterly base now, and then I'm going to come in with my coloured pencils. So I'm using mostly Caran d'Ache Luminance pencils here, and then also some Neocolors. But I'm just picking out a few greens first and just adding on a bit more definition. I could use my brush pens for that, but I wanted a bit more of a range of colour, and I had way more greens that I know I love the colour of with the Luminance. I do mix my mediums all the time, so I tend to not just use one medium. I would say 95% of the time come in with coloured pencils and Neocolors on top. So that's what I'm doing here. I think that it really does look like watercolour underneath because I did use the water, and then I'm just using this to add on more detail and texture just to finish it off to a standard which I was pleased with. I definitely found with these brush pens that it worked well to build up the layers. It will depend on your paper of course, but I was really pleased with how this paper held it, and I do have a video on my channel reviewing this sketchbook if you want to learn more about this. But if you use thicker paper, mixed media paper, I think it will work really well. But I do think that having a smooth surface really helps, especially for blending it out. So the ink is water-based, so I could blend it out with my brush and then layer up the different shades to create the depth. The smooth paper really helped me to blend them, so that's why I recommend the smooth rather than the rough. But of course you can make it work with whatever paper you're working on because it will just create different textures. It's up to you if you prefer that, but I tend to prefer a smoother one. So I'm just adding more texture in the background just to add a bit more interest and detail. I really enjoyed making this water feel more like water. And then I'm coming in with my pops of colour, so the Caran d'Ache Neocolor IIs. I do have a video about these also on my channel. It's quite an old video now, but I think it's still got lots of information in there, so I'll leave that in the cards above. But yeah, just finishing this off, it didn't need much, but I do really like adding this on top just to add a little bit more colour and a bit more texture too. So like I said, it didn't need this, but I do like coming in with these and just, I don't know, making it zing a bit more, adding on just that final pop. So here is where I make a mistake. So I added on this turquoise. I wasn't loving it, so I tried to smudge it out, but my finger had green on from before. So I just tried to clean it off with a clean paintbrush and more water, and that did work. So it wasn't a super obvious smudge, and I was able to get away with it, I think. With everything, nothing's permanent. You can change it up. If it didn't go away, I could just come in with gouache or something to layer on top. But don't worry about making mistakes. We can always try and fix them or learn from them. Here is where I'm adding on the sky blue Neocolor, which I love, just adding on my little signature scribbles and a few touches here and there, just to highlight, and I love how this works with the peachy pinks and the very vibrant greens. Okay, so we're coming up to the finished piece. I am really impressed with how versatile these pens are. I really loved layering them and using them in a different way to my Tombows. They're great for really quick sketches, but I really like this painterly effect with the layering and blending. So I think they're really, really fun to use, and a big thank you to Ohn Mar for giving me these. It definitely feels more like watercolour to me, and I'm really happy with this final piece. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know what you think down below in the comments. I hope you have a lovely week, and I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later!